Hi, my name is Clara DeWald, and I am in Professor Swenson's 2114 lab. For this assignment, we were to draw an outline or a sketch of the body and draw the endocrine glands within the body. We are also supposed to point to the endocrine gland and name the hormones, and there's a specific number of hormones that we were required to list the functions for. This is my drawing of the human body, the endocrine system, and I will be pointing to specific glands when I talk about specific hormones. This is an enlarged picture of the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary and the posterior pituitary gland. First, the anterior pituitary releases 4 tropic hormones and 2 other hormones that are not tropic hormones. The 4 tropic hormones are thyroid stimulating hormone, or TSH, follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH, luteinizing hormone, which is also called LH, and adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH. The 2 other hormones are growth hormone and prolactin. For this assignment, we only had to discuss the function of 1 hormone released by the anterior pituitary. Thyroid stimulating hormone is the hormone that I picked to discuss. Thyroid stimulating hormone, or thyrotropin, is released from the thyrotropic cells of the anterior pituitary following stimulation by thyrotropin releasing hormone, which is actually released by the hypothalamus. Thyroid stimulating hormone binds to receptors on the follicular cells of the thyroid gland and stimulates the thyroid gland to release thyroid hormone, which is actually 2 iodine-containing amine hormones, thyroxine or T4, and triiodothyronine, which is T3. This is the first response. The second response is the second response to thyroid stimulating hormone binding is that the follicular cells begin synthesizing more colloid to restock the follicle lumen. The second endocrine gland, I forgot to point on my picture to where the anterior pituitary. So the pituitary is found underneath the hypothalamus right here, and you can see it better in my enlarged picture. So the anterior pituitary is actually going to be the one that is blue right here. Second, the posterior pituitary, which is right here, right behind the anterior pituitary, right underneath the hypothalamus, and I colored it in orange. The posterior pituitary releases a total of 2 hormones, which are oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone, or ADH. Oxytocin is stimulated by impulses from the hypothalamic neurons in response to stretching of the uterine cervix or the suckling of an infant at the breast. Oxytocin stimulates the uterus by triggering uterine contractions and initiates labor. Oxytocin also targets the breast by initiating milk ejection or letdown. ADH, which is also called vasopressin release, is stimulated by impulses from hypothalamic neurons in response to increased blood solute concentrations or decreased blood volume. ADH is also stimulated by pain, some drugs, and low blood pressure. ADH targets the kidneys and stimulates kidney tubule cells to reabsorb water from forming urine back into the blood. ADH functions in preventing wide swings in water balance, helping the body avoid dehydration and water overload. The next endocrine gland I'll be discussing is the thyroid gland. And the thyroid gland can be seen right here. It is this whole butterfly or horseshoe-shaped gland right here in the neck. It produces a total of 2 hormones, thyroid hormone and calcitonin. Thyroid hormone is derived from iodinated thyroglobulin and is actually composed of 2 iodine-containing amine hormones, thyroxine, T4, and triiodothyronine, which is T3. T4 is the major hormone secreted by the thyroid follicles. Most T3 is formed at target tissues by conversion of T4 into T3. Thyroid hormone affects virtually every cell in the body. Some of the major functions of thyroid hormone include increasing basal metabolic rate and body heat production. It does this by turning on transcription of genes concerned with glucose oxidation, and this is thyroid hormone's calorigenic effect. The second function of thyroid hormone is regulating tissue growth and development. Thyroid hormone is actually critical for normal skeletal and nervous system development and maturation and for reproductive capabilities. The third function of thyroid hormone is in maintaining the blood pressure by increasing the number of adrenergic receptors in blood vessels. The second hormone produced by the thyroid gland is calcitonin. Calcitonin is a polypeptide hormone that is released from the parafollicular cells or C cells of the thyroid gland. Calcitonin is released in response to a rise in blood calcium levels. It does not have any known physiological role in humans. However, when calcitonin is given at pharmacological doses, it does have a bone-sparing effect and is given therapeutically to patients to treat Paget's disease and sometimes osteoporosis. At high concentrations, calcitonin targets the skeletal system by initiating osteoclast activity, and thereby it inhibits bone reabsorption and release of calcium from the bony matrix. At high concentrations, calcitonin also functions by stimulating calcium uptake and incorporation into the bony matrix. The next endocrine gland I'll be discussing is the parathyroid gland. The parathyroid glands are found on the posterior or dorsal surface of the thyroid gland. So in my picture, they are these reddish dots, and usually there are 4 of them, but the actual number varies from person to person. I actually read that one individual had 8, but the usual number is 4. The parathyroid glands are responsible for producing parathyroid hormone. The parathyroid cells of the parathyroid glands secrete the parathyroid hormone, and parathyroid hormone is a protein hormone and the most important hormone for controlling blood calcium levels. When blood calcium levels drop, parathyroid hormone is released. Rising blood calcium levels inhibit parathyroid hormone release. Parathyroid hormone increases blood calcium levels by stimulating the skeleton, the kidneys, and the intestines. The release of parathyroid hormone stimulates osteoclasts to digest some of the bony matrix and release calcium and phosphates into the blood. Its release also enhances the kidney's reabsorption of calcium from the forming urine into the blood. And parathyroid hormone's release also promotes activation of vitamin D, thereby increasing absorption of calcium by intestinal mucosal cells. Vitamin D is required for absorption of calcium from food, but first the kidneys have to convert it to its active form, which is vitamin D3, also called calcitriol. Parathyroid hormone stimulates this transformation. The next endocrine gland we'll be talking about is the pancreas, which can be found, it is this yellow gland right here in between the kidneys. The pancreas is a mixed gland composed of both endocrine and exocrine gland cells. It contains roughly 1 million pancreatic islets or islets of Langerhans, which produce the 2 pancreatic hormones. The islets contain 2 major populations of hormone-producing cells, the alpha cells and the beta cells. The alpha cells release glucagon and are fewer in number, and the beta cells release insulin and they are more numerous. The effects of these 2 hormones are antagonistic, meaning they oppose each other. They have opposite functions. Glucagon is a very potent hyperglycemic hormone that increases blood glucose. 1 molecule can cause the release of 100 million glucose molecules into the blood. Glucagon targets the liver and promotes the breakdown of glycogen to glucose, the synthesis of glucose from lactic acid and from non-carbohydrate molecules, and the release of glucose to the blood by liver cells, thereby causing blood glucose levels to rise. Insulin is a hypoglycemic hormone that decreases blood glucose. It is actually synthesized as part of a larger polypeptide chain called proinsulin, and then the enzymes excise the middle portion, releasing the functional insulin. Insulin works to lower blood glucose levels in 3 different ways. First, it enhances membrane transport of glucose and other simple sugars into most body cells, especially muscle and fat cells. Its second function is it inhibits the breakdown of glycogen to glucose. And its third function is to inhibit the conversion of amino acids or fats to glucose. And also, insulin also stimulates amino acid uptake and protein synthesis in muscle tissue. The final endocrine gland that we were to discuss for this assignment were the adrenal glands. The adrenal glands can be found on top of each kidney, 1 on each kidney, and they are a cone or a pyramidal shape. The adrenal glands are also called the suprarenal glands, and they're composed of an inner adrenal medulla and an outer adrenal cortex. As a whole, the adrenal glands produce 4 types of classes of hormones. The only hormones produced by the adrenal medulla are the catecholamines, epinephrine, and norepinephrine. The cortical cells of the adrenal cortex are arranged in 3 separate layers or zones, each zone producing a different type of hormone. First, the outer layer is called the zona glomerulosa, and it produces mineralocorticoids. The middle layer is called the zona fasciculata, and its cells produce glucocorticoids. The innermost layer of the adrenal cortex is called the zona reticularis, and its cells produce gonatocorticoids. For this assignment, we only had to list the functions of 2 of these hormones. So I will discuss mineralocorticoids and glucocorticoids. The main function of mineralocorticoids is to regulate the electrolyte concentrations in extracellular fluids, particularly of sodium and potassium. The release of mineralocorticoids, chiefly aldosterone, is stimulated by the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone mechanism, which is that it is activated by decreasing blood volume or blood pressure. Mineralocorticoids release is also stimulated by elevated potassium levels and only slightly influenced by ACTH, or adrenocorticotropic hormone. Mineralocorticoids target the kidneys by increasing blood levels of sodium and decreasing blood levels of potassium. Since water reabsorption usually accompanies sodium retention, blood volume, and blood pressure rise. In some cases, aldosterone can alter the acid-base balance of the blood by increasing hydrogen ion excretion. Glucocorticoid release is stimulated by ACTH, or adrenocorticotropic hormone. Glucocorticoids include cortisol, cortisone, and corticosterone, which The most important of the glucocorticoids is cortisol. Glucocorticoids, they target body cells by promoting gluconeogenesis and hyperglycemia. They mobilize fats for energy metabolism, and they stimulate protein catabolism. Glucocorticoids also assist the body to resist stressors and depress inflammatory and immune responses. And that is all I have for my video essay. Thank you for listening.